Hey everybody, this is Hercules Pedix, founder, curator, docent, and gift shop employee of the Hercules Pedix Academy of Comic Book Studies. Today we're going to be looking at Startling Stories, The Fantastic Four, Unstable Molecules, number 1 through 4. Quite a mouthful of a title. But this was a miniseries Marvel put out in 2003, and this represents to me what I've been thinking about the past few years about how the early to mid 2000s was like a golden age for mainstream comics. Both Marvel and DC were doing really kind of extraordinary things you'd never imagine them doing. And a few months ago, we looked at that Peter Bag Spider-Man comic. That was actually part of the Startling Stories series as well. Who would have thought, Marvel would publish a Peter Bag Spider-Man comic? This is another example. Getting all these crazy indie creators who would never draw for Marvel to do a comic for Marvel. DC was doing some crazy stuff too at the time. God, Marvel was like having Richard Corbin draw the Hulk. Who would have thought Richard Corbin would be drawing mainstream superhero comics, when we were kids? And he had like Luke Cage having anal sex with Jessica Jones in the Max titles. Just doing all this really interesting stuff. For the first time in years, I was interested in Marvel Comics again. At least some of the titles. And it only lasted a few years, and then the MCU came along, and now all these characters are just IP, not to be toyed with. Nothing too interesting is allowed anymore, because they don't want to fuck up these valuable properties. But there really was this 5-year period where there was some great stuff. This is a perfect example. James Sturm, a graphic novelist, probably most famous for Gollum's Mighty Swing. He writes, designs, and lays out this comic. And Guy Davis, I think this might be before he started BPRD, but he had already done his long run on Sandman Mystery Theater. So he already had one foot in the mainstream industry, kinda. But, he never drew superheroes, and he probably never will. And so he pencils and inks it. They got Sikoryak to help out with the art from Raw Magazine and all of his many short story collections and graphic novels. Just crazy that Sikoryak is drawing a Fantastic Four comic. All the covers are by Craig Thompson of Blankets fame. And even for the colorist, they got Michael Verana, the Black Eye comics guy. So very interesting lineup for a Marvel superhero comic. Let's check these out. So there's that Craig Thompson cover. And we start off with the Guy Davis art. So there's an artifice to this comic. Supposedly, the Fantastic Four, the characters that we grew up reading, those are based on real-life people. This comic takes place in 1958, a few years before the incident that turned them into the Fantastic Four. And we get to see, who these real people, what they were really like, who the Fantastic Four comics were based on. Start off with Reed Richards. He's pretty much the same. Still obsessed with science, kind of cold and distant. And he just lives for scientific exploration. Now we see the Sturm household. So some of the names are a little different. In real life, it was Johnny and Sue Sturm. They lived together in this house. Both of their parents are dead. Sue has had to raise Johnny since he was a little boy. Johnny is now kind of like a sullen, surly teenager. We see him sneak down to where Sue is sleeping, and he grabs one of her Vapor Girl comics. Sue has this guilty pleasure for Vapor Girl comics. And I love this. So this is where Sikoryak comes in. He draws all the Vapor Girl panels, and they pop up throughout the story as almost like a counterpoint to what's going on in the comic. And it's just drawn in this beautifully like Atlas Comics kind of wonky style, a little bit Bill Everett, a little bit Basil Wolverton, a little bit just basically crappy cartoonist. But it looks so great to me. This is just fun stuff. And look at this. You would never see this in a Marvel comic, or at least you never thought you would. So Johnny Storm is jerking off to the Vapor Girl comic. Because, pornography was hard to come by back in the 50s. So that's all you had. You didn't have Pornhub or anything like that. But right off the bat, I was reading this last night and just going, whoa, they're getting away with murder here. Now we see Ben Grimm. He's with his way younger girlfriend, and it's their 1 month anniversary. And Ben pretty much is like the Ben Grimm we know, kind of a charming, brusque, salt of the earth type. We see Reed at his laboratory. He's kind of a celebrity in this world of science. All the young students look up to him. He's just discovered unstable molecules, or at least a theory. There's this young student there named Ned Lampum, and he's kind of like giving Reed some pointed questions. And Reed's colleague is all like, "That's enough out of you, Mr. Lampum. It's an inappropriate question." So I guess they, I think this guy is his boss, basically. And they're talking about Sue. Reed's been dating Sue for a few years. They're not married yet. He's Sue's neighbor. He lives right across the street. And he's, as you can tell, he's considerably older. So he calls up Sue, and we just see her reactions. And it does seem like Reed kind of browbeats her, and she just takes it. She's just like, "But I had plans tonight. I don't know if I can have a party here." He's like, he basically just convinces her with he uses his superior intellect to kind of bully her. And look at her by her body language. She's just like, "Yes, dear." So it's definitely like Reed is the alpha in this relationship, and Sue's kind of like a typical woman back then, just has to listen to her man, you know. She goes up to wake up Johnny, and he's a typical teenager. He's just like, "Go away." But she gets him out of bed. His best friend is waiting for him, Rich. And Rich and Johnny are a bunch of misfits. They're both really into comic books. They're kind of losers, staring at the pretty girl in school from behind a car. And then we see Ben at his job. Ben's a boxing trainer, works at a gym. And just like, how Stan Lee was kind of lauded for introducing the idea that superheroes aren't just all perfect. They have feet of clay. They have flaws just like you and me. This really takes it further. I gotta say, James Sturm's dialogue and all the character traits he gives these people, very naturalistic, very realistic. Really like the writing in this. All the dialogue, these people read just like, they talk like how people talk in real life. And it's not that they're not that flawed, these people. They're just like you and me. For example, like Johnny stealing his sister comic to go beat off. That's just real, you know? That would never be in a normal Marvel comic when we were kids. So this guy from the government comes up to Reed and says, "We need you in Washington, D.C. immediately." Now we cut back to Johnny and Rich. And we see the bullies, the local bullies who pick on Johnny and Rich all the time. In Washington, D.C., basically a general tells him that, like, we're basically conscripting you. We need your brain. The Russians are up to something, and we need you to be on our team to fight them. And it seems like we see a little interlude with Ben, and Ben is just like the Thing, you know? You know how all kids like the Thing the most in the Fantastic Four? He's a very charming guy. Everyone loves him. He has a different girlfriend like every month. Ladies find him charming. He's just an all-around good egg, you know? Another one of those great Sikoryak panels. So Johnny and Richard playing hooky. And the bullies come into the soda shop where they're hanging out. They're flipping through comics. And they pick on him. So when they leave, Johnny takes the brakes off the guy's car, and the car rolls into this telephone pole. And the bullies are like, "Oh, those motherfuckers are dead." That's the end of this issue. I love this. He does this thing, Notes and Sources, which is James Sturm writing this kind of fake afterword, kind of propping up this artifice that he's created, talking about how when he was a little kid, he was visiting his aunt, and he found these newspaper clippings about the exploits of Johnny and Sue Sturm, a brother and sister who took great risks during the Cold War. Although they were not related to my family, Aunt Alice informed me that my late uncle took great pride in the fact that we shared the same name. And so he never realized that the Fantastic Four were based on these real people. Because, he was born later than 1961. So supposedly he went to a Marvel editor and said, I'd like to tell the real story of the real people behind the Fantastic Four. And that's what this comic supposedly is. And he even has footnotes here to make it seem even more credible. Really well thought out. Definitely put a lot of work into this. We got number 2, another nice cover. I love this, starting off right with the Vapor Girl panels. That's great stuff. So now we see a lot of the events we just saw, but the captions are Sue Storm's thoughts. It's her point of view. So we see Reed call her about, kind of browbeating her into having a party at her house. But now we see how she feels about it. My protests are meaningless. Reed has already reduced the situation to its irreducible components. My responsibilities to his career, each of us making sacrifices for our future. He's right, of course. Reed's always right. He's a genius. But you could tell she doesn't like it. She's rationalizing it. We see her go yell at Johnny to get up. And, we see now how much it hurts her that Johnny is pushing her away and is always just kind of mean to her. And here's something you'd never see in a Marvel comic. She says, I need a cigarette and a cup of coffee. Another great Sikoryak panel. So while she's smoking her cigarette and drinking her coffee, this neighbor, Mrs. Milliken, comes by. She's kind of like a busybody old lady, kind of saying all these snide things to her. Man, look at how nice Guy Davis's art in this. Like, I was a huge Sandman Mystery Theater fan. I actually own I think I own all of them. I like Guy Davis's art a lot, but he was a little erratic back then. Sometimes faces would change. Sometimes you wouldn't even recognize, like, oh, that's supposed to be the guy from the other panel. But this is just great. I love this art. Really clean and simple for Michael Davis. Not a lot of lines. But man, he just captures the faces really well. So Sue's getting ready for her book club meeting. I guess her mother died pretty young. When her mother died, Sue kind of inherited her spot in this book club with all of her mom's old friends. And she doesn't really like them. They're not nice people, but she's kind of, it's just her like duty almost. But she's invited other younger people to join, which makes it a little better. But her mom's old friends are just these like kind of jerky, snobby old ladies. I love that panel. A little Archie knockoff there. Here's the younger woman. And they're reading Peyton Place for their book club. And it kind of becomes this generational argument. The older conservative ladies are shocked and outraged by it. The younger liberal women are defending it. Turns into this kind of a personal fight. And just to be mean, one of the old ladies says something to Kay. Kay's one of the younger ladies. She says, oh, doesn't your husband draw those ghastly little comic books? Because back then, drawing comic books was not something to be brag about. I've read many interviews with comic artists where they would lie at parties and just say, oh, I'm an illustrator, or, I work for the magazines. Admitting that you drew for comics was kind of like saying, I do pornography for a living. So it gets kind of heated, and Kay has an outburst and starts crying. Obviously, this woman hit a nerve. Something's been bothering her. And the shitty old woman just smiles in victory. It's just a She's total shit. Some more of these great panels. God, I would kill for a fucking whole issue of Vapor Girl by R. Sikoryak. That would probably be the funnest comic ever. So Sue gets a phone call. It's the police. Johnny and Rich got caught playing hooky. And Sue has to come get him, of course. And she's furious with them. So she's like, okay, you have to run all my errands now because I don't have time to take you home. So she goes to see Reed at Columbia University. He's already left because she's so late from having to pick up Johnny. Look at this. It is I, King Grumore. She goes to the gym. She's got to invite Ben to the party. So just like in the comics, Ben and Johnny have this total, like, they like to horseplay with each other, even at that young age. They always kind of playfully rib each other and stuff. So they get a moment alone. You can tell by their talk that if it wasn't for Reed, you know, they're both kind of in love with each other. Sue just loves how Ben is so charming and just has such a great attitude to life. And he's just in awe of Sue. And but Reed is his best friend since college, just like in the comics. So he would never even think of it. And she's a good woman who would never think of it either. So Ben's girlfriend comes in, and she kind of invites herself to the party. She says, that would be a great way to spend our month anniversary. Let's go to the party. So it's settled. So she's driving Johnny around and kind of scolding him, and he just says, I hate you. And it hits her hard. I mean, it really devastates her. Some more of these great panels. I love this shit. So she's doing some last minute grocery shopping for the party, and she runs into an old boyfriend, Joey King. And apparently Joey King's this beatnik now. He's like one of those kids that just read On the Road and all of a sudden just takes off. So he left town years ago and he's back visiting. He's got all these beatnik friends in tow with him. And he's just being crazy. He's getting down his knees, spouting this shitty poetry. And Sue is just kind of shocked. She's like, I'm still trying to reconcile the Joey King I dated in high school with the rambling, incoherent weirdo I saw at the market. So she gets home, and Johnny is grounded. She goes up to his room and says, Johnny, I just want you to know that I love you very much. And he just says, go away. So this is just a bad day for Sue. And now she's going to have this party. And Reed is nowhere to be found because he had to do that Washington, D.C. Mission. So she's getting ready for the party. Putting her face on. And now she's waiting for the people to show up. God. Sorry to keep pointing these out, guys. I just don't want you to miss them. Such good panels. But man, yeah, talk about like, I like some of the writing in this, just how human these characters are. So, near the end here, she's just like, I miss my mom. I do not like my life and I want it to change. And that's the end of the chapter. It's pretty sad. We have more kind of back matter here. Apparently, Susan Sturm became a women's libber in the 60s and 70s. And so she's going to grow, I guess, after, the 50s end and the 60s continue. Look at that. Great cover. Totally looks like it could be an Atlas comic. Here's a little information about Roy Coles. So apparently Kay's husband works for Atlas Comics. He's the artist of Vapor Girl. Number 3. So this is nice. They take some old Jack Kirby panels. And this time the narration is from the point of view of Rich, Johnny's little friend. And he's basically talking about from the present. He's talking about, reminiscing about his childhood and being best friends with Johnny. So it's the same night. Now we're from Rich's point of view. Rich goes up to the Sturm household, and Sue informs him that Johnny's grounded and he can't come out. But look how Rich sees her, because Rich has a total crush on Sue. So he sees her as Vapor Girl, because he lives in this comic book fantasy land. And he walks away, walks back home. He lives in this crappy apartment. His dad's gone. His mother doesn't seem like the best mom. She's always off dating guys, a different guy every week. Never has enough money. They're constantly moving. He talks about committing suicide. Even at that young an age, he was contemplating it. And he has those fantasies people do where how everyone's going to miss him after he dies and they'll regret not treating him better. But look how it's drawn. It's the Sikoryak art. So we see that his fantasies are basically comic book fantasies. And I like this. He uses some other Jack Kirby panels to illustrate how he's feeling. I learned that if you are miserable, you blame somebody. And we see Dr. Doom telling Namor, bitter memories that cry out, revenge, revenge. So he's sitting there watching TV, and Johnny shows up. He busted out. And they're just walking around. I love this. They're such comic geeks. They play this game where Johnny says, a screaming woman, more. 2 flying saucers, more. A burnt tree stump. Forward on the left or smoking in the background. Forward. Panel colored all in red. Tales to Astonish number 18, page 2, panel 4. I mean, that is a superior comic geekdom. Definitely should have his own YouTube channel, this guy. That's some amazing stuff. So they're horsing around in this alley, and the bullies see him. Those bullies from the day before. Oh, actually, that's the same day. Yeah, I think it's the same day. And they start chasing him. And they elude them and actually double back and get in their car. And they steal their car. And Rich is like, they're going to kill us. And Johnny's like, they were going to kill us anyway. He only died twice. Oops, I'm sorry. He only died once. And as they're driving around, Joey King and the Beatniks pull up and say, hey, can you tell us guys how to get to the beach? He's like, yeah, I'll lead you there. So I guess it's like, you got to go through all these woods, past these weird fences. And it's like a little secret beach. And they show up, there's a big Beatnik party. So Johnny and Rich are all hanging out with them. Rich isn't too thrilled about it. He doesn't like these guys. He's like, yeah, these guys are weird. He just wants to go home and read comics. And they're total, like, typical Beatniks. Holy sugar daddy Buddhas. Just spouting out nonsense. Oh, actually, that's Joey King spouting out his stupid poetry. So Rich loses track of Johnny. He's looking for him. He finds him all alone on the beach with Joey King. And Joey is like, spieling to him about freedom and the road. And, you got to escape your plastic fantastic world, man. How now, brown bureaucrat? And this is kind of a nebulous scene. He reaches in to whisper something in his ear, but it also looks like, is he making a pass at Johnny? Is he into young guys? I don't know. I could be reading that into that, but we never find out because Rich shows up and interrupts whatever was going on. But no matter what happened, it seems like Joey's words have infected Johnny. He's got a faraway look in his eyes now, Rich notices. So the night continues. Joey's reading from On the Road. And Johnny seems more and more into it, more and more attentive to the words. And Rich says that we should go. He says, I'm not going home, Joey. I'm sorry, I'm not going home, Rich. I think I'm going to go with Joey and escape for good. And Rich is just devastated. It's his only friend in the world. And he feels hate in his heart for these beatniks for taking his friend. And I love this. He has this comic book fantasy of him looking like Sergeant Fury, blowing away these beatnik robots. Kind of looks like Herb Trimpe art there. That's a great panel. So Rich and Johnny go off to take a leak. Well, Johnny does, and Rich accompanies them. And then the bullies show up and beat the living shit out of them. And that's the end of this issue. So notes and sources. This is great. They have fake pictures for Joey King, what he looks like, as he got older, and a little bio about what happened to him in the 60s and 70s. And Rich, we see what happened to him. Now we got the last issue here. Another nice Thompson cover. We start off with Ben Grimm's girlfriend just freaking out on him. She calls him a monster. You're an animal, you're a monster. And she storms out. So we see Ben hanging out with his buddy at this Irish bar. And he's telling his buddy why, her smile was too gummy. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Something about her fingernails. Apparently, Ben is very picky, and he goes through women like Kleenex. And he always finds some fault with them, some crazy thing that he doesn't like about them. And somehow Sue comes up in the conversation. And you kind of get the feeling that maybe the reason why Ben is this fickle is because, he realizes that Sue is like the ideal, and every other woman falls short of her. But he can't do anything about it because it's his best friend's girl. Like the Cars thing about. So his friend storms off. They get in an argument. And immediately he looks over at this waitress and hits on her. And she's like, not interested, buddy. And Ben says, skanky whore. Which you'd never see the real Ben Grimm. He would never say that to Medusa. Or Moondragon. So now we're at the party, and, Reed has not shown up still. He's still delayed. And so Sue is just getting blotto. She's pretty drunk. And she actually starts flirting with that young student, that Ned Lapham guy who was questioning Reed earlier. She's really flirting with him. I mean, she's like playing with his ear and saying all this kind of suggestive innuendo. And then Kay shows up. And she says, I'm really sorry I can't come over. Roy brought all of his cartoonist buddies home. And she says, bring them over. That'll be great. And then she finds out that Kay's husband, Roy, actually draws Vapor Girl. And, Sue pretends she's thrilled for Johnny's sake, even though she's the one who likes Vapor Girl and buys them. But she says, Johnny will be so thrilled. But you can tell she's thrilled, too. And then Reed's older colleague, Dr. Mitchell, shows up. I think he's his boss, his supervisor. And this guy's always kind of been like a little sleazy to Sue, always staring at her breasts. And he grabs her ass. And we don't see the punch thrown, but she punches him in the eye. But right then, Ben shows up. And she totally forgets about him. Because, she really loves Ben. She's like, Ben, I'm so glad you're here. Because she's basically been stuck at this party with all of of Reed's colleagues who she doesn't even know. So she's getting more drunk. She's pretty tipsy. So the cartoonists show up. And Kay says, Sue, this is Stan, Jack, Art, and Harvey. And she gets them all drinks. Ben Grimm tries to convince Stan and Jack that they need to make a comic about him called Touchdown Grimm, Gridiron Star. And Jack says, sports comics don't sell. Monster comics are what's selling now. And Ben says, I'm a goddamn monster. Just ask my ex. Put me in your funny books. Which is, I like that foreshadowing. This man, this monster. Indeed. So the party seems pretty fun. And then that neighbor, that Mrs. Milken, she's like, somebody's blocking my driveway. The car needs to be moved. And this guy's just like, well, come in, have a nightcap with us. Come on, what could it hurt? And she actually says, okay, maybe for my nerves. I like this. There's a scene with some guy chatting with Artie Simek. I never thought I'd read this in a comic. So Sue goes upstairs to look for Johnny, to check in on him. And she realizes that he's flown the coop. And she's furious. Meanwhile, we see Reed in a cab, and he's speeding to Sue's house. He's trying to get there as fast as he can because he's late. And while he's in the back seat, he's rehearsing his engagement proposal to Sue. Of course, he's doing it like Reed Richards, totally overthinking it. And the taxi cab driver just says, hey, all you got to say is, I love you, marry me. It's that simple. So Ben goes up because he was checking up on Sue, see where she disappeared to. And she just breaks down. She unloads on Ben. And then, I never thought I'd see this in a Marvel comic, or any comic. They start making out. And of course, right then, Reed gets home, or to her home, walks up the stairs, and catches them in flagrante. Sue's half undressed. They were really going to go to town here. So here's where we see the differences in characters. This, Reed would never talk like this in a comic. Even though this is a comic, but you know what I mean. He says, Father was right about you, Sue. You are a harlot and beneath my station. And Ben is just completely apologetic and just mortified. He says, Ben, you are nothing but a train wreck of a man. Sue and you deserve one another. And Sue has got her fire up, though, from drinking. She's like, how dare you talk like that to me? And she's so angry, she chases him down the stairs in her bra slip. She doesn't even care. Of course, Ben is still just trying to apologize. And then right on cue, that's when the beatniks show up. Just to add a little bit more chaos to the stew. Of course, they've got Johnny. They rescued Johnny and Rich. Even though Rich looks like he's half dead. They rescued them from the bullies. So she's yelling at John, and he's like, fuck you, I'm leaving with Joey. So this big fight breaks out between Ben and Joey. And one of Joey's beatnik friends knocks him out with a bottle. And now the captions are Reed's point of view. And he's really judgmental. We realize that, wow, he really hates Sue now. So she knows she can't keep Johnny. He's just going to go. So she says goodbye. And he leaves with the beatniks. Reed hitches a ride with him, too. And now we see an epilogue here. And we see Reed, obviously he's alone. And he's still doing research. And he's looking at this microscope. And I like how what he's talking about, he's really talking about the relationships in his life. But it's couched in scientific knowledge. And I mean, it makes it obvious because through the microscope lens, we see the people in his life. Earlier this evening, I was surprised by a substantial miscalculation as to the character of a certain closely studied individual. As a result of my error, I was unable to foresee the ensuing entropy that could have been predicted with accurate data. But it just basically ends like this. He, it doesn't seem like he's going to go back to Sue or anything. He's just, all he's saying, he's just whispering to himself, I trusted you. He said, he closes with, these unstable molecules can thus only be studied in terms of their relationships with one another, not as isolated units. It is these relationships, however tenuous and mercurial they may be, that bind our world together. And that's the end. We get a little more of these notes and sources. And there, he does mention in one of the editorials that there was supposed to be two other miniseries. Every few years, they were going to put out, another Startling Stories Fantastic Four that would cover like what the Fantastic Four were up to in the mid '60s, and then another one would cover what they were up to in the late '60s. And so, I'm pretty sure those never came out, unfortunately. Because I really dig this comic. It's very interesting, especially if you grow up, as a comic book nerd, reading the Fantastic Four. This is pretty neat stuff to me. And hope you enjoyed looking at it. And I hope to see you next time here at the Hercules Pedics Academy of Comic Book Studies.